The Late Kick Tour, which we have not even named yet, is coming up this fall. We got a great college football season in store, and we are going to start figuring out our schedule draft tonight. Now, if you're new around here, and tons of you are, what in the world am I talking about? Well, I am probably the most blessed person in the world because I get to spin the globe every week, put my index finger wherever I want to go, and then this company pays to fly me there, and I get to stand on the sideline and watch games. And I want to stress again, that is what I call a job. Yes, I am professionally employed to do such things. If you're watching on YouTube, this is some of the footage. That's cell phone footage. That is iJosh footage from last year's tour. And we choose where we're going to go. Last year we called it the Renaissance Tour because it was a Renaissance season. And you see some of the destinations that we made it to. That Iowa State game in week 2, first time I ever went to Ames. The next week, Auburn at Penn State, whiteout, first time I had ever been there. I went to OU, Texas, Red River Shootout, my first ever experience there. I dodged minis and many other things at Knoxville the week after that with Ole Miss and Tennessee. Just raining garbage down on me. We saw Michigan State upset Michigan. Later in the year, we saw Baylor storm the field against Oklahoma. I saw Michigan take down Ohio State. It's really incredible, isn't it, that there's a company out there that would pay someone to go experience that. I know, because before I did this professionally, I was you, and I paid every last dime I had, and some of the dimes my parents had, to go attend those games. So I know how blessed it is to live this lifestyle. Well, this fall, we're doing it again. We have not named the tour yet. Got a good idea of what it's going to be. We haven't named the tour yet, but we are going to start narrowing down our choices. Weeks 1 through 6, we're going to do right here, right now. This is not final, but these are the leans that I have for where we're going. Let's start in week 1. Week 1 is sort of the Labor Day week, so it's not just confined to one day. But as you know, I have a show on Sunday. So right off the bat, the Florida State LSU game is probably off the table. We've got Cincinnati at Arkansas. Cincinnati, this is the only time, obviously, that I will probably get to see a G5 team during the season because of what our criteria are. We want to see the biggest games, but we want to see competitive games in that order. We want to see as many teams and venues as possible, and we are in it for experience and memory. That's what we're trying to accumulate. When you're talking at the end of the day about that game, we want to be the folks who were at that game. We don't want to see blowouts. We want to see the biggest teams and the biggest moments, best environments. Cincy, Arkansas is going to be on fire. Fayetteville will be on fire. This is the highest expectation they've had for that team in several years. You're getting a playoff team coming in there in Cincinnati. I'll answer you. We've never had an opportunity to see a G5 team coming off a playoff appearance. So you've got that one, but you've also got Utah at Florida the very same week. That's an ultra-rare cross-country out-of-conference game. We don't get many SEC Pac-12 out-of-conference games, period. And I got to start asking myself, how many opportunities will I have to see Utah? Florida may not be a contender this year. But if I can get them early in the season, it justifies a trip to the swamp. And so I don't know that I'll be able to get there again this year. Then you start to look at the marquee in Columbus, Ohio. You've got Notre Dame against Ohio State, 2 massive brand names. So if you want to see big brands and you want to have an experience, man, they'll have that ticket stub or the digital version of it forever that they're showing off. I'll tell you what we're leaning here. And I know we got Oregon, Georgia this day, but that's a 17-point spread. We try and stay away from neutral site games because we believe in the on-campus environment. My lean, and it is an ever so slight lean right now, this is nowhere near finalized, is Utah against Florida. The thinking there, I just spelled out for you, and also keep in mind, when we've got Arkansas plays a ton of marquee games this year. So there are going to be other opportunities to get to Arkansas, and believe me, if you know the show and you know me, I will so help me see Arkansas play in Razorback Stadium this year, Reynolds Razorback Stadium. So the slight lean, very slight, is Utah at Florida week 1. Subject to change. Write it in pencil. Week 2. This one gets a little bit easier to figure out, but I want to show you the slate anyway. Alabama goes to Texas. That is a slam dunk leader in the clubhouse right now. But just for fun, you got South Carolina at Arkansas. Again, ditto, same point. We got some opportunities down the road for Arkansas. Tennessee is at Pitt. That is the 2021 ACC champ, Pitt, And that's a team that went into Neyland and beat Tennessee last year. First big game for Tennessee this year. They got Pitt and they got Florida in the first month of the season. That one's tasty. I just saw Iowa State, Iowa last year. There's another opportunity in a couple of weeks with Iowa that I'll talk about in a second. Kentucky's at Florida. Baylor at Brigham Young is a sleeper game there. But none of those are topping Alabama at Texas. So out of all the weeks, probably the one I'm most confident in leaning towards is Alabama at Texas in week 2. And if that wasn't enough, has anyone seen what kickoff time is there? Noon Eastern, big noon kickoff headed into Austin. Forecast high, maybe 107, 108. It's whatever. At that point, hot is hot is hot. But also a flight home that night is a flight home that night. So Texas hosting Alabama week 2, pretty solid lean there. Week 3 is not nearly as clear a picture. So here we go. This is where I really start needing your help. It's going to get even muddier than this in week 4 and week 5. I'm telling you, I don't suffer anxiety. This gives me anxiety. Because I know I can only be in one place, and I don't want to be the guy who's watching the TV screen in the press box or on the plane on the way home saying, I could have been at this game instead, and I'm not. It happened last year. Don't want to let it happen again this year. So week 3, Oklahoma at Nebraska is a game I badly want to be able to go to. Nebraska's got to hold up their end of the bargain. We already spelled that out earlier on the show. This would be a phenomenal atmosphere and environment in a venue I've never been to. I've never been to Lincoln, never been to a game at Nebraska. So you got that one. But this is an out-of-conference bonanza on this week 3 slate. Penn State is at Auburn. Both of those teams could be undefeated still. Brigham Young is at Oregon. That's a huge game. That's one of Oregon's toughest tests of the year. It gets better. Miami is at Texas A&M. That is a single-digit point spread right now. And for all we know, Miami may have the quarterback edge in that game. Georgia is at South Carolina. I know that may not pop off the screen to you, but that's one of Georgia's toughest road tests all year. And how about that game at the bottom there? Michigan State at Washington, a little cross-country action. Where would you go if you were calling the shots here? I think it's pretty well listed in order. Oklahoma at Nebraska has my eye. So that's my lean right now, OU at Nebraska. But boy, that Penn State at Auburn game, especially considering I saw that one last year in Happy Valley, and that one delivered, there is virtually no shot that's a blowout game. So if you care about seeing close games, man, Penn State Auburn could play 10 times out of 10. Average margin of victory would be a field goal. I can virtually guarantee that. That's like back in the day when the Titans or Jaguars or Steelers would play each other in the AFC playoffs. I would always love to do 2-team 7-point teasers with my local bookie back in Georgia because it was like the easiest NFL bet ever because the margin of victory was always going to be a field goal either way. So my lean, and it's a slight lean again, my lean on this week is Oklahoma at Nebraska. But as you can see clearly, all that is contingent on teams taking care of business because one upset could throw this entire thing into a blender. And if you want an example of what that looks like, follow me to week 4. Because this is where it just goes completely haywire. We spent a solid hour debating with and yelling at each other out in the bullpen, talking about where we should go and what strategy should be involved here. So here's the lineup in week 4. This is a very big week. We got Arkansas versus A&M. That game's in Dallas. We went to that game last year. I always love getting to Arlington early because that's one of the only venues in America big enough where they can drive the buses down into the stadium and around the corridor, and they just drive a bus right up to your locker room. That's always fun. You don't get to see that on TV, so I won't waste your time. Florida is at Tennessee on this Saturday. Pause for a second. Think about what we're talking about. If Florida beats Utah in week 1, and Kentucky, I think, is also another team they will have had to have beaten there, and Tennessee has beaten Pitt, all of a sudden we're sitting here in week 4, and we've got undefeated Florida against undefeated Tennessee in Neyland Stadium. Now, right this second, none of you nationally, outside those fan bases, are looking forward to that game. But you know how college football treats us. And all of a sudden, that game in week 4 is just, everyone's got to see it. All of a sudden, you're planning your Saturday around when that game comes on TV. Baylor at Iowa State is a very sneaky game. It's not on your radar right now. But Baylor has already played Brigham Young by this point. Iowa State has already played Iowa. If they win those games, all of a sudden that becomes a game that's popped up on the radar. Notre Dame's at North Carolina that day. Wisconsin is at Ohio State. That's one of Ohio State's toughest regular season tests. If Wisconsin were to get that win, imagine what that does in the West standings. And imagine what that does for Ohio State, leaving zero margin for error. But look at the very bottom game. This looks like a throwaway. Clemson at Wake Forest. But it's not a throwaway. This is going to be a 10-point or maybe even single-digit point spread. It's one of Clemson's most pivotal games this year. It's a game where it's going to be imperative they can score because that's a team in Wake that can score on you. And here's where strategy gets involved. If we go with Clemson-Wake Forest in this week, then the next week we've got to think ahead. NC State-Clemson is the next week. So do we want to see Clemson 2 weeks in a row? That wouldn't be sticking to our criteria of seeing as many teams as possible. But then again, if we go with Florida and Tennessee on this day, and we know good and well that we've got Bama, Tennessee down the road, then how do we juggle that? So you see how quickly you get like 10 different irons in the fire? And also, by the way, we're just leaving Arkansas A&M on the table because we're trying to balance how many times we see Arkansas, but then again, we have never seen them in person in a home environment before, even though that's a neutral site game. So this is just a bunch of word salad, but this is why it gives me a little bit of anxiety trying to figure out where we're going to go. Where would you go here? Which game would you go to, factoring everything in? You know what I actually think is, man, I already gave the guys the answer. So my lean was Clemson-Wake Forest. That's my lean. I could so easily just call an audible right here and infuriate everyone in the control room and make it Florida-Tennessee because there's such an equal argument to be made for Florida at Tennessee. But for the sake of continuity, let me make it Clemson-Wake Forest. We've never been to a game at Wake Forest. It's also trying to figure out, am I going to get to see Clemson in the regular season? Because there are far fewer opportunities to do that because they play in less marquee games than Florida and Tennessee. So let's put Clemson-Wake Forest as the tentative Week 4 lean. Then we go to Week 5. It gets no easier, friends, no easier. Alabama plays at Arkansas this day. You think that's the one, right? That if we didn't go to Cincy, Arkansas in Week 1, then this is the one. Okay, hold that thought. We've also got Michigan at Iowa in this week as well. Now, you may think to yourself, why would Michigan, Iowa be in the picture here? Keep in mind, this is not Week 1. This is Week 5. Think ahead. Think what could have happened. Michigan has not played anyone. This is really their first test, and it's their first road test too. I got Michigan, my Big Ten champ from last year. We're going to find out how wobbly or secured the parts on this team are. And I've got Iowa. Iowa's played Iowa State already. If they've won the game, do you know what you see here? What you see here is Michigan going into Kinnick Stadium to face an undefeated Hawkeye team, possibly, both of them being undefeated. I've got an undefeated against an undefeated in the Big Ten in Week 5. I don't know that I'll be able to get to Iowa again this year. So think about the criteria. Think about the dominoes we're trying to knock down. So all of a sudden, even in this week, Alabama at Arkansas does not become a slam dunk. And I've got NC State at Clemson as well. That, I think, is probably the biggest game in the ACC this year. So where's the lean? Where do you lean here? You don't have any other opportunity to see Kinnick Stadium this year, in all likelihood. But yet you got the biggest game over there in the ACC possibly all year. But then I got Bama going to Arkansas, and that will be every bit as lit up an atmosphere as Texas at Arkansas was last year. Here's the lean. Now, I might as well hold my nose while I do it. Just say Bama at Arkansas is the lean right now. And just know there is no smart money on this. When we get this far out, I mean, we're trying to predict who's undefeated, and there's already been a month's worth of games. Let's just take our very, very, very light pencil, and let's write Alabama at Arkansas. That's the lean right now, and we will revise this like 100 times. And why not? Let's just go further out into the abyss, because this is the big week. I'm going to stop it at Week 6. Week 6 is the biggest week in college football, at least as it appears right now. There are like 50 million big games this day. Ohio State is at Michigan State. Utah is at UCLA, a very sneaky good game on the West Coast. This is Red River Shootout Day, Texas versus OU. This is Texas A&M at Alabama, Jimbo versus Saban. This is Tennessee, and it's heavily dependent on what the record for the Vols is, on the road at LSU. There is a path, folks, a path where you've all of a sudden, out of nowhere, got these co-main events in the SEC where you've got Bama hosting A&M at night. Headlines write themselves there. But what if Tennessee is undefeated? If Tennessee's undefeated here, it means they've beaten Pitt and Florida already. And then they go to Death Valley the week before Tennessee's going to play Bama. All of a sudden, that's a game in any other week that would be a slam dunk. I'm going to that one. Notre Dame is in Las Vegas to play Brigham Young on this day. Brigham Young's got one of the most intriguing schedules this year in the country. North Carolina's at Miami, sneaky good ACC game. Obviously, the tentative pick here is Texas A&M at Alabama. That's the tentative pick. But you know what? On this same weekend last year, if we were sitting in June, Alabama at Texas A&M was the slam dunk game. But by the time the game came around, A&M had already lost multiple games. I didn't go. Famously at this point, I think it's a famous story on this show, I went to the Red River Shootout. I have no regrets about that. That was a classic game, highest scoring game in that series history. That wasn't the problem. The problem was I was credentialed for this game too. And I was already in Texas. And one game started at noon and the other game started at 8 p.m. And I was already at the airport. I had time to get down there and I didn't. I flew home and watched A&M upset Alabama on a flight somewhere over Arkansas. So anyway, it's not always as obvious come game week as it seems like it will be in June. So yes, A&M Bama seems like the logical choice now, but this sport can do funny things to you. So let's very tentatively, but solidly right now lean Texas A&M and Alabama. So here are the weeks 1 through 6 leans. And boy, I cannot stress enough, this is not final. Utah at Florida week 1. Bama at Texas week 2. OU at Nebraska week 3. Clemson at Wake Forest. Still shocking to see that there at week 4. Bama at Arkansas week 5. A&M at Bama week 6. Obviously, Bama's in there 3 times. I can pretty reasonably tell you we're not going to go to 3 Alabama games in the first 6 weeks of the season. So already, even though I haven't even finished the segment yet, I'm pretty sure that's going to change. In fact, I'm confident that's going to change. Bear with us. If you thought that was jumbled, wait till you hear us try and predict the second half of the season. Because then it becomes a knife fight, even in my own head. And you guys, it's kind of like witnessing a real-life mental breakdown.